2 years in prison won't kill you, they said, sounding like they were suggesting a mandatory vacation rather than asking me to sell my soul for their golden child. But here's what they missed. I do not just see a crime. I read it like a balance sheet. When that mobile notary walked in, the heavy thud of her stamp did not just verify a signature, it confirmed exactly who was about to lose everything. My name is Autumn Long, and I am 31 years old. Standing in the foyer of my parents' house, I felt the familiar, suffocating weight of the air conditioning. It was always set to 68 degrees in the Mercer household, a temperature that preserved the expensive floral arrangements and kept the residents in a state of perpetual, chilly preservation. I had been summoned. There was no other word for it. When Gregory and Elaine Mercer called, you did not visit. You reported for duty. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had haunted my childhood insomnia. I walked toward the study, the heels of my boots clicking against the marble floor. I had bought these boots at a thrift store, and I knew my mother would stare at the scuff on the left toe before she even looked me in the eye. That was the Mercer way. They appraised value before they acknowledged humanity. I pushed open the double oak doors to the study. The room was designed to intimidate. It smelled of aged leather, pipe tobacco, and old money. The walls were lined with books that had never been cracked open, their spines perfectly color-coordinated to match the Persian rug. It was not a family room, it was a courtroom, and I knew immediately that I was the defendant. My father, Gregory Mercer, sat behind his desk. It was a massive slab of mahogany that looked like it had been carved from the hull of a warship. He did not stand up when I entered. He just watched me over the rim of his reading glasses, his eyes cold and assessing. To his right sat my mother, Elaine. She was perched on the edge of a high-backed chair, her hands twisting a silk handkerchief, her face a mask of tragic, carefully curated distress. And then there was Marissa. My younger sister was curled up on the velvet love seat in the corner, sobbing. It was a theatrical performance worthy of a Tony Award. Her mascara was running in artful streaks down her cheeks, and she was clutching a throw pillow to her chest as if it were a life raft. She looked fragile. She looked broken. She looked exactly like the victim she was about to pretend to be. "Sit down, Autumn," my father said. It was not a request. I took the stiff wooden chair opposite the desk. It was the chair reserved for subordinates, for people who needed to be reminded of their place. I kept my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. I had learned a long time ago that showing emotion in this room was like bleeding in a shark tank. "We have a situation," Gregory said. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He never asked how I was, or about my job, or if I was happy. I was a utility to him, an appliance that was occasionally plugged in when needed. "I can see that," I said, my voice steady. "Marissa seems upset." Marissa let out a fresh wail, a high-pitched sound that grated against my nerves. Elaine reached out and patted her knee, murmuring soothing nonsense words. Gregory opened a drawer and pulled out a thick file folder. It hit the mahogany desk with a heavy, dull slap. He placed his hand on it. His fingers splayed wide, claiming ownership of the disaster inside. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he slid it across the polished wood until it stopped inches from my hands. "Read it," he commanded. I opened the folder. It was a financial dossier. My eyes scanned the pages, and my brain instantly shifted into gear. This was my language. This was what I did every day, though they thought I was just a lowly data entry clerk. I saw balance sheets, wire transfer records, and tax filings. I saw the name of a boutique consulting firm I knew Marissa had started 2 years ago. And then I saw the rot. It was sloppy. It was arrogant. There were 5 separate counts of tax fraud. There were transfers of funds from a project account into a personal slush fund. There were invoices for services that clearly never existed. I flipped a page and saw the total, $250,000. Marissa had embezzled $250,000 from the investors of her vanity project. I looked up. "This is prison time," I said. "Federal prison," Exactly, Gregory said. His voice was devoid of panic. It was the voice of a man discussing a termite infestation. The IRS has flagged the discrepancies. The audit is scheduled for next month. Once they dig in, they will find everything. Why are you showing me this? I asked, though a cold pit was already forming in my stomach. I knew, somewhere, deep down, I already knew. Marissa is getting married in 6 months, Elaine spoke up, her voice trembling. To Grant Langford. I looked at my mother. I know. Grant's family, Elaine continued, her eyes pleading. They are particular. The Langford name is an institution. His father is running for the Senate next term. If this comes out, if Marissa is indicted, the wedding is off. Grant will leave her. The Langford family will destroy us socially. We will be pariahs. So Marissa made a mistake, I said, keeping my face blank. She stole money. She has to face the consequences. Marissa looked up from her pillow, her eyes red and swollen. I didn't mean to, she cried. I just borrowed it. I was going to put it back. The retreat in Bali was essential for networking. And the car? I needed the car to look successful so people would invest. It was a business expense. It was theft, I said flatly. It was a misunderstanding, Marissa shrieked. Enough, Gregory barked. The room went silent. He leaned forward, clasping his hands on the desk. He looked at me with an expression that might have been pity. If he were capable of it. Marissa cannot go to prison. Autumn, she has a future. She is building a life that will elevate this entire family. The Langford connection is vital. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was thin and taut. We need someone else to take responsibility, he said. I stared at him. The air conditioning hummed, a low, indifferent drone. Someone else, I repeated. The documents have her name on them. She is the registered agent. We can change that, Gregory said. We can backdate the corporate restructuring. We can show that she stepped down as the financial officer 18 months ago. We can show that she delegated full financial control to an operational manager. I felt the blood drain from my face. An operational manager. You, Gregory said. There it was. The trap snapped shut. You want me to say I stole the money, I said. It wasn't a question. You have the background for it, Gregory said, sounding like he was complimenting my resume. You work in data. It is plausible that you were handling the books. We will say you offered to help your sister, that you took over the accounts, and that you siphoned the funds without her knowledge. Marissa was just the trusting artist. You were the calculating sister. I looked at Elaine. She refused to meet my eyes. She was studying the pattern on the rug as if her life depended on memorizing it. You want me to go to prison, I said. It won't be for long, Gregory said quickly. He waved his hand dismissively. We have consulted with a lawyer, discreetly, of course. For a first-time offender, nonviolent crime, you are looking at a plea deal. 2 years, maybe 18 months with good behavior, minimum security. It is basically a camp. A camp, I echoed. Autumn, look at your life, my mother said softly. She finally looked up, her eyes wet. You are struggling. You live in that tiny apartment. You drive that old car. You have no husband, no prospects. Marissa has everything to lose. You. She trailed off. But the end of the sentence hung in the air, heavy and sharp. You have nothing. 2 years in prison won't kill you, Gregory said. He said it with the casual confidence of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. You are used to hardship. Autumn, you are tough. You have always been the resilient one. Marissa, she would not survive a week in a place like that. She is too delicate. I looked at Marissa. She was watching me now. Her tears miraculously paused. There was a look in her eyes, not gratitude, but expectation. She expected me to do this. I was the safety net. I was the human shield. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. But my face remained frozen. I had practiced this face for 31 years. And if I say no? I asked. Gregory sighed, as if I were being unreasonable. If you say no, Marissa goes to jail, the wedding is canceled, this family is ruined, and I will cut you off completely. I know you don't take money from us, but I still have influence. I can make sure you never work in this town again. I can make your life very difficult. Autumn. But if you do this, Elaine interrupted, leaning forward, we will take care of you. When you get out, we will set you up. $50,000, maybe even 75. A fresh start. You can move to a new city. You can go back to school. She was buying my life. She was haggling over the price of my freedom like she was bargaining for an antique vase at a flea market. $75,000 for 2 years of my life, for a felony record, for the destruction of my name. I looked down at the dossier again. I saw the numbers, I saw the greed, I saw the stupidity, and I saw something else. I saw an opportunity. If I said no right now, they would fight me. They would try to frame me anyway, but it would be messy. If I said no, they would be on guard, but if I said yes, I let my hands tremble. It took focus, but I made my fingers shake just enough as I reached for the glass of water on the desk. I let my shoulders slump. I let my lower lip quiver. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat. I need to think. There is no time to think, Gregory said sternly. We need to start the paperwork tonight. Please, I whispered. I looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. Please, Dad, it is prison. I just need 24 hours. I need to wrap my head around it. I need to sleep on it. Gregory looked at Elaine. They exchanged a silent communication. They saw the fear. They saw the submission. They thought they had won. 24 hours, Gregory said. He checked his gold watch. It is 8 o'clock. You come back here tomorrow at 8 o'clock sharp. We will have the notary and the lawyer ready with the affidavits. You will sign the confession, and we will handle the rest. Okay, I said. Okay. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself to walk slowly, like a woman walking to the gallows. You are doing the right thing. Autumn, Elaine said. She stood up and came toward me, reaching out to hug me. I let her. Her perfume was expensive and cloying, smelling of lavender and betrayal. We are so proud of you. You are saving your sister. You are saving all of us. Thank you. Autumn, Marissa squeaked from the sofa. I love you. I promise I will make it up to you. I pulled away from my mother. I could not look at them. If I looked at them, the mask might slip. I might scream. And I could not scream. Not yet. I have to go, I said. I turned and walked out of the study. I walked down the long hallway, past the portraits of our ancestors who looked down with disapproving glares. I walked through the foyer and out the front door. The night air was cool and crisp. I walked to my car, a 10-year-old sedan that rattled when it idled. I got in and closed the door. The silence inside the car was absolute. I put the key in the ignition, but I did not turn it. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I looked back at the house. The lights were on in the study. I could imagine them in there, pouring drinks, celebrating the crisis averted. They were probably toasting to their cleverness. They were probably praising themselves for handling the autumn problem so efficiently. They did not hate me. That would have implied passion. That would have implied that I mattered enough to evoke a strong emotion. No, it was worse than hate. They were indifferent to me. I was a tool. I was a hammer to be used and then tossed back in the drawer. I was an asset to be liquidated to cover a bad investment. 2 years in prison won't kill you. The words echoed in my mind. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was 8:15. I had 23 hours and 45 minutes. They thought I was going home to cry. They thought I was going home to pack a bag and say goodbye to my pathetic little life. They thought I was the pawn. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I unlocked it and opened my contacts. I scrolled past the few friends I had, past the landlord, until I found the section for professional contacts. My tears had dried. The trembling in my hands had stopped completely. I started the car. The engine coughed to life. I pulled out of the driveway. the gravel crunching under my tires. As I turned onto the main road, I didn't turn right, toward my apartment. I turned left. I wasn't going home to sleep. I was going to work. They had handed me a dossier of their crimes, thinking it was my death sentence. They didn't realize they had just handed a forensic analyst the blueprints to their destruction. I drove into the darkness, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the Mercer family. I was calculating their liquidation value. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt illuminated by the yellow glow of sodium streetlights. I drove on autopilot, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel of my battered sedan. The car smelled faintly of old coffee and the vanilla air freshener I had bought at a gas station 3 months ago. It was a humble scent, the smell of a life lived within strict margins. In the silence of the drive, my mind began to deconstruct the last hour. Not emotionally, but structurally. You see, the Mercer family was not really a family. It was a small economy. We operated like a corporation with a very specific mission statement: protect and inflate the value of the primary asset. That asset was Marissa. In economics, there is a concept called a strategic investment. This is where you pour capital, resources, and attention, expecting a massive future yield. Marissa was the strategic investment. From the moment she could smile for a camera, she was groomed to be the face of the Mercer brand. Ballet lessons, private tutors, the right summer camps, the debutante ball that cost more than my first year of college tuition. Every dollar spent on her was considered down payment on a future that involved a wealthy husband and a powerful social standing. Then there is the concept of a sunk cost. A sunk cost is an expenditure that has already been incurred and cannot be recovered. You do not throw more money at a sunk cost. You write it off and minimize your losses. I was the sunk cost. I was the daughter who wore glasses at age 6, who preferred reading in corners to dancing in the center of the room. I was the one who was smart, but not charming. I was useful for checking homework or designated driving. But I offered no return on investment. So, the capital flow stopped. I lived in a studio apartment on the edge of the city, a 400-square-foot box where the radiator clanked like a dying engine and the view was a brick wall. I tracked every single penny I spent on a spreadsheet. I knew that a gallon of milk cost 20 cents less at the market 3 blocks further away. So I walked the extra 3 blocks. I wore clothes until they wore out, and then I mended them. My life was a series of calculations designed to keep me in the black. Because I knew there was no bailout coming from the bank of Gregory and Elaine. Meanwhile, Marissa lived in a world where math did not apply. She lived in a loft downtown with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows. She drove a leased luxury SUV that she needed for client impressions. Her Instagram feed was a curated gallery of impossible consumption. Just last month, she had posted photos from a spiritual wellness retreat in Sedona. I knew the place. I had looked it up out of morbid curiosity. It cost $5,000 for a weekend of chanting and drinking kale juice. Under the photo, she had captioned it, "Investing in my soul, blessed entrepreneur life." I remembered sitting in my dark apartment, eating a sandwich made of discount turkey, staring at that picture. I had done the mental math then. Her boutique consulting firm, Marissa Mercer Lifestyle Solutions, had only been open for 18 months. She had 3 clients that I knew of, and one of them was our mother. There was no way the revenue from her business covered the rent on her loft, let alone $5,000 soul cleansings. The numbers did not add up, but in the Mercer economy, nobody audited the golden child. Gregory and Elaine just nodded and smiled, likely slipping her checks under the table to bridge the gap while she waited for her big break. They saw her spending as marketing. They saw my frugality as a lack of ambition. They called me a data entry clerk. That was the label they had stuck on me 5 years ago. And it had stayed there, like a price tag on a clearance item, at Thanksgiving dinners or Christmas parties. When family friends asked what Autumn was doing, my mother would wave her hand vaguely and say, "Oh, Autumn is doing data entry for a legal firm. Very steady, good benefits." It was a dismissive, boring description. It suggested I spent 8 hours a day mindlessly typing numbers into a computer, a cog in a machine, easily replaceable and barely conscious. They never asked for details. They never asked what kind of data. They never asked what the firm actually did. And because silence was the only shield I had in that house, I never corrected them. I let them believe I was a drone. I let them believe I was simple. The truth would have terrified them. I worked for Kestrel and Brook Legal Strategies. We were not a standard law firm. We were the people big corporations and high-net-worth individuals called when they wanted to destroy someone legally, or when they needed to find money that had vanished into thin air. I was not a clerk. I was a senior forensic analyst. My job was to hunt. I did not use a rifle or a bow. I used algorithms and databases. I spent my days tracing wire transfers through shell companies in the British Virgin Islands. I analyzed the burn rate of failing startups to prove executive fraud. I reconstructed shredded financial histories from metadata and bank fragments. I could look at a company's ledger and tell you not just where the money went, but who the CEO was sleeping with, based on the credit card timestamps and hotel receipts. I was good at it. I was terrifyingly good at it. My boss, a woman named Julianne Brooke, who had a smile like a shark, paid me $120,000 a year, plus bonuses. I didn't live in a small apartment because I was poor. I lived there because I was hoarding every dime. I was building an escape fund. I was building a fortress of cash that no one knew about, so that one day I could disappear. But the Mercers didn't know that. To them, I was Autumn the plodder, Autumn the poor, Autumn who needed $75,000 so badly she would go to prison for it. That arrogance was their fatal error. It was a security breach so massive it was almost laughable. They had just handed a complex financial crime scene to a forensic expert and asked her to sign it. They assumed that because I was quiet, I was blind. They assumed that because I was their daughter, I was loyal. They assumed that because they had never valued me, I had no value. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. The anger that had been a cold knot in my stomach was starting to unfurl, heating up, turning into fuel. I was not going home. I could not go home. If I went back to my apartment, I would just pace the floor. I would stare at the walls and hear my mother's voice telling me that prison was just a camp. I needed to be somewhere neutral. I needed a workspace. I signaled and took the exit for the industrial district. There was a place there called Night Owl Commons. It was a 24-hour co-working space that catered to insomniac coders, freelance graphic designers working on European deadlines, and people who just didn't want to be alone in the dark. I pulled into the parking lot. It was half full. The building was a converted warehouse, its large windows glowing with warm, yellow light. It looked like a lighthouse in the sea of the night. I grabbed my laptop bag from the passenger seat. Inside was my personal computer, a machine far more powerful than the one I kept on my desk at home for show. I locked the car and walked toward the entrance, my boots crunching on the gravel. Inside, the air smelled of roasted coffee and ozone. It was quiet. A library hush broken only by the click-clack of keyboards and the hum of the espresso machine in the corner. I scanned the room and found a booth in the back, secluded, away from the main traffic flow. I sat down and set up my station, laptop open, power cord plugged in, phone on the table, face down. I did not order coffee. I did not order food. I was not here to consume. I was here to dissect. I closed my eyes for a second and visualized the dossier my father had slid across the desk. I had only looked at it for a few minutes, but I had a photographic memory for numbers. It was a quirk of my brain, the thing that made me a freak as a child and a weapon as an adult. I could see the balance sheet. I could see the vendor names: Lumina Consulting, Blue Horizon Logistics, Mercer Langford Holdings. That last one had caught my eye. Mercer Langford Holdings. It was clumsy. Why would Marissa name a shell company using her fiancé's last name before they were even married? Unless she was already leveraging his name to get credit. Unless she was banking on the merger of their families to cover her tracks. I opened a terminal window on my laptop. The screen went black, populated only by the blinking green cursor. I felt a rush of calm wash over me. This was my domain. Here, I was not the disappointment. I was the predator. I started by running a background check on myself. It sounded paranoid, but in my line of work, you learned that the people closest to you were often the ones using your identity. If my parents were willing to send me to prison to save Marissa, what else had they been willing to do? I typed in my social security number. I navigated to the credit bureaus. I bypassed the standard consumer interfaces and went into the back-end reporting tools I had access to through my licensure. The screen filled with data. I scanned the lines, and my breath hitched in my throat. I had expected to see my student loans, which were paid off. I had expected to see my one credit card, which I paid in full every month. I had expected to see a credit score in the high 700s. Instead, I saw a disaster. There were 6 credit cards opened in my name in the last 3 years. All of them were maxed out. There was a business loan for $50,000 taken out 18 months ago for an entity called AL Ventures, listing my parents' address as the headquarters. There was a lease on a BMW. I drove a 10-year-old sedan. But apparently, on paper, I was driving a luxury vehicle. My credit score was 520. I sat back in the booth, the air leaving my lungs. I felt dizzy. The betrayal was physical, a punch to the solar plexus. They hadn't just asked me to take the fall tonight. They had been using me as a trash can for their financial waste for years. They had been systematically destroying my financial identity to fund their lifestyle. Or Marissa's lifestyle. It didn't matter. It was all the same economy. They had stolen my name. They had stolen my credit. And now, they wanted to steal my freedom to cover up the fact that they had stolen everything else. I looked at the screen, at the red numbers that defined my financial existence. A normal person would have panicked. A normal person would have called the police right then and there. But I was not a normal person. I was a mercer, raised in a cold house, and I was a forensic analyst trained to take down cartels and corrupt CEOs. Panic was inefficient, anger was useful, but only if controlled. I leaned forward, the glow of the screen reflecting in my glasses. "Okay," I whispered to the empty air. "You want to play games with numbers? Let us play." I wasn't just going to defend myself. I wasn't just going to prove I was innocent. That was too small. That was defensive. I was going to dismantle them. I began to type. I started pulling the corporate filings for every entity linked to my parents and my sister. I started mapping the network. I was going to find every dollar they had hidden, every lie they had told, every tax law they had broken. They had treated me like a liability on their balance sheet. They were about to find out that I was actually an external auditor, and the audit had just begun. I worked through the night. The coffee shop emptied out and then slowly started to fill up again as the early risers arrived for their morning commute. I didn't move. My fingers flew across the keys, building a dossier of my own. By the time the sun began to lighten the sky outside the warehouse windows, turning the black into a bruised purple, I had the full picture. It was worse than I thought. It wasn't just Marissa's embezzlement. That was just the tip of the iceberg. The entire Mercer family lifestyle was a Ponzi scheme, shuffling debt from one account to another, using new loans to pay off old interest, with my identity serving as the collateral damage. They were broke, they were desperate, and they were sloppy. I closed my laptop. I felt a strange sense of peace. It was the peace of clarity. I knew exactly what I had to do. I wasn't going to call the police. That would be too quick. That would give them a chance to spin the story, to use their connections, to paint me as the unstable, jealous daughter. No, I needed to trap them. I needed them to sign their own death warrants. I needed to use their greed and their arrogance against them. I checked the time. It was 6 a.m. I had 14 hours until the deadline. 14 hours to construct a trap so beautiful, so legal, and so binding that they would walk into it with smiles on their faces. I packed up my bag. I stood up and stretched, my joints popping. I walked out of Night Owl Commons and into the dawn. The air was cold and fresh. I got into my car and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. My skin was pale, and there were dark circles under my eyes. Perfect. I looked exactly like a victim. I looked exactly like the beaten-down, compliant daughter they expected to see. I started the engine. I had one more stop to make before I went back to the house of horrors. I needed to make a phone call, not to a lawyer, not yet. I needed a notary, but not just any notary. I needed a mobile notary who played by the book, someone who was rigorous, punctual, and completely unaffiliated with the Mercer social circle. I pulled up a name I had used for work before, Dana Pruitt. She was a woman of few words and absolute precision. She didn't care about sob stories or family drama. She only cared about identification and ink. I dialed her number. It rang twice. Pruitt Mobile Notary. A crisp voice answered. Dana, it's Autumn Long. From Kestrel and Brook, I said. I have a private job for you tonight. 8 p.m. It is a sensitive family matter involving multiple property transfers and affidavits. I need you to be there exactly on time. I have an opening, she said. Address? I gave her my parents' address. I will be there, she said. And Dana? I added. Bring your embossing seal, the heavy one. I always do, she said. I hung up. The stage was set. The actors were ready, and the script was about to be rewritten. They thought they were sending me to prison. They had no idea I was about to foreclose on their entire existence. The engine of my car ticked as it cooled, a metallic metronome in the silence of the abandoned lot I had pulled into. It was an overflow parking area for a defunct shopping mall, the asphalt cracked and sprouting weeds, illuminated only by the distant, sickly orange glow of the highway lamps. It was the kind of place where people came to hide things, or to do things they did not want seen. It was the perfect place for an autopsy. I was not dissecting a body, I was dissecting my own life. I opened my laptop again. The screen was a harsh, white rectangle in the darkness. In the co-working space, I had seen the overview, the 3-digit credit score that marked me as a financial leper. But I had not looked at the line items. I had not looked at the blood spatter. Now, with the silence of the night wrapping around the car like a shroud, I logged into the detailed credit monitoring portal. I needed to see the granular data. I needed to see the who, the when, and the how much. I clicked on the tab for Open Accounts. The list that populated was long enough to require scrolling. First, there were the credit cards. I counted 5 of them. 3 were from major banks. 2 were store cards for high-end department stores. I clicked on the transaction history for the first card, a Platinum Rewards Visa with a credit limit of $20,000. The balance was $19,842. I scanned the purchases. They were not for groceries. They were not for gas. $4,000 at a boutique in Milan. $2,500 for a VIP table package at a club in Miami. $600 for a hair appointment. The dates aligned perfectly with Marissa's Instagram timeline. The trip to Italy last summer? My credit card had paid for it. The weekend in South Beach where she claimed she was networking with potential investors? My credit card had funded the champagne. I felt a cold burn in my chest, but I forced myself to remain clinical. I was a forensic analyst. These were not betrayals. They were data points. I moved to the next item. It was a business line of credit for $50,000. The entity attached to it was M Squared Concepts, LLC. I recognized the name. It was one of Marissa's early startups that had fizzled out after 6 months. But the loan was still active, and it was currently 90 days past due. I drilled down into the loan application documents, which were archived in the system. I downloaded the PDF and zoomed in. The applicant listed was Autumn Long. The title was Silent Partner, but the contact email address was autumn.mercer@bizgmail.com. I had never created that email address. I hovered over the recovery phone number associated with the account. It was my mother's cell phone number. I sat back, the leather of the car seat creaking. This was not just Marissa swiping a card from my wallet. This was a coordinated effort. My mother had to have verified the account. She had to have received the confirmation codes. She had helped build the infrastructure of this lie. But the real smoking gun, the piece of evidence that turned my stomach and then froze my heart, was a series of recurring payments on the third credit card, every month, on the first, There was a charge for $3,000. The merchant category was listed as contractor services/rent. The recipient was a generic-sounding company called Oakwood Management Group. I opened a new tab and searched for Oakwood Management Group in the State Business Registry. It was a simple search, the kind I did 10 times a day at work. The registered agent for Oakwood Management Group was Gregory Mercer. The registered address for the business was 1402 Oakwood Drive, my parents' house. I stared at the screen until the pixels started to blur. Marissa was using a credit card opened in my name to pay rent or fees to a company owned by our father. They were cycling money. Marissa got the credit, spent it, and a portion of that debt was being funneled directly back into my parents' pockets under the guise of legitimate business expenses. It was a closed-loop ecosystem of fraud. My father was not just protecting Marissa, he was profiting from her theft of my identity. They were cannibalizing me. They were stripping the meat from my financial bones to feed their own status. I imagined them at dinner, discussing finances. Did they laugh about it? Did Gregory say, "Put it on the Autumn account?" Or did they justify it with their twisted logic? Autumn doesn't use her credit. She doesn't need it. We are just borrowing her capacity. We are a family. After all, I clicked on the section for hard inquiries. There was a recent one, from only 3 weeks ago. It was for a luxury auto lease. The application had been denied, likely because my score had finally bottomed out. But there was a document attached to the inquiry, a letter of guarantee. I opened it. It was a PDF of a scanned document. It was a promise to co-sign the lease, to take full financial responsibility if the primary lessee, Marissa, defaulted. And at the bottom of the page, there was a signature, Autumn Long. I zoomed in on the signature. It was done in blue ink. It had the loops and the slant of my handwriting. To an untrained eye, it looked authentic, but I knew how I signed my name. I knew the specific pressure I applied on the upward stroke of the A. I knew that I never connected the G at the end of Long to the underline. This signature connected them. It was a good forgery. It was practiced. Whoever had signed this had spent time studying my handwriting. They had probably practiced on scrap paper, over and over, until they got it right. I felt a wave of nausea, hot and bitter, rise in my throat. I rolled down the window and took a deep gulp of the cold night air. The smell of exhaust and damp asphalt filled my lungs. For years, I had thought I was just the disappointment. I thought I was the black sheep because I was not glamorous, because I was not social. I thought their neglect was a result of our different personalities. I was wrong. The neglect was a strategy. They kept me at arm's length so I wouldn't see what they were doing. They belittled my job as data entry so they wouldn't realize I had the skills to catch them. They kept me feeling small and insecure so I wouldn't ask questions about why my mail sometimes went missing, or why they were so insistent on handling certain pieces of paperwork for me. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was now almost 7 in the morning. The sun was starting to crest over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and bloody orange. The world was waking up. People were brewing coffee, waking their children, getting ready for honest work. And in a mansion on Oakwood Drive, the Mercer family was likely sleeping soundly, confident that their problem had been solved. They thought they had broken me last night. They thought the terrified woman trembling in their study was going to come back this evening and sign her life away. I looked back at the screen. The nausea was gone. The shock had evaporated. What was left was something hard, cold, and incredibly sharp. It was the feeling I got when I found the missing variable in a complex forensic audit. It was the thrill of the solve. I was not their daughter anymore. I was not a sister. I was a creditor. And they were in default. I reached into my bag and pulled out a flash drive. I plugged it into the laptop. I began to download everything, every statement, every loan application, every forged signature. I organized them into folders labeled by year and by entity. I created a master spreadsheet linking the flow of funds from the fraudulent accounts to the assets they held dear. The Oakwood Management Group payments alone were enough to pierce the corporate veil. I could prove that Gregory Mercer was knowingly accepting funds obtained through identity theft. That was money laundering. That was racketeering. If I went to the police, they would go to prison for 10 years, maybe more. But prison was too simple. Prison was a passive punishment. You sit in a cell and you wait. I didn't just want them punished. I wanted them stripped. They cared about two things: their money and their reputation. The Langford wedding was the pinnacle of their social climbing. The house was their fortress. I closed the laptop with a decisive snap. The sound echoed in the small car like a gunshot. 2 years in prison won't kill you, I whispered to the empty parking lot. My voice was steady. It sounded like my father's voice, devoid of emotion, purely transactional. They were right. Prison wouldn't kill me. But the truth? The truth was going to obliterate them. I started the car. The engine purred, sounding stronger than it had the night before. Or maybe I just felt stronger. I had the evidence. I had the motive. And thanks to my earlier call to Dana Pruitt, I had the mechanism. I was not going to run. I was not going to hide. I was going to go back to that house at 8 o'clock tonight. I was going to walk into that study, and I was going to sign exactly what they wanted me to sign, but not before I made them sign something else. If they wanted to use my name to cover their sins, fine, I would let them. But I would make sure that by the time the ink was dry, my name would be the only thing they had left, and it would be the weight that dragged them to the bottom of the ocean. I put the car in gear and drove out of the lot, leaving the darkness behind. I had a busy day ahead of me. I had a war to plan, and my war room did not need guns. It just needed a printer and a very specific legal addendum. The forensic analyst was off the clock. The executioner had just clocked in. I pulled back into the parking lot of Night Owl Commons. It was fully light now, the morning sun glaring off the asphalt. But inside the building, time was artificial. It was a windowless bunker designed for people who measured their lives in billable hours and lines of code. I swiped my keycard and walked past the front desk, ignoring the sleepy wave from the day manager. I did not head for the open booths this time. I needed privacy. I booked one of the think tanks, soundproof glass cubes with whiteboard walls and a dedicated hardline connection. This was my war room. There were no guns here, no silencers, no fiber wire. My weapons were far more lethal. I had PDFs, Excel macros, and the unblinking, unforgiving testimony of bank ledgers. I connected my laptop to the dual monitors on the wall. The screens flickered to life, bathing the small room in a cool blue light. I cracked my knuckles and began the upload. The data I had scraped from the credit bureaus and the banking portals in the parking lot was raw. Now, I needed to refine it. I needed to turn data into a narrative. I started by pulling the master statement for the M-Squared Concepts account, the one Marissa controlled, the one that was currently drowning in debt. I cross-referenced it with the Oakwood Management account my father used to launder the family expenses. On the left screen, I had the money coming in. On the right screen, I had the money going out. Forensic accounting is not just about addition and subtraction. It is about fluid dynamics. Money moves like water. It flows downhill. It pools in low places. And if you try to block it, it finds a crack. But in the Mercer family, money did not move like water. It moved like a school of fish. I watched the patterns emerge. A deposit would hit Marissa's business account, $50,000 on September 12th. The source was listed as Langford Family Trust, Angel Investment Tranche 1. My stomach tightened. Marissa wasn't just stealing from strangers or banks. She was harvesting capital from her fiancé's own family. She was soliciting seed money from Grant Langford's relatives under the guise of her consulting firm, likely promising them robust returns on some vaporware project. I traced the $50,000. It sat in the account for exactly 4 hours. Then, the school of fish scattered. The $50,000 was broken into 12 separate transactions, 4 transfers of $9,000 each, just under the $10,000 reporting threshold that would trigger a federal flag, went to 3 different credit cards. 2 of those cards were in my name. 1 was in Elaine's. Then came the vendor payments, $5,000 to G. Mercer Consulting Services. I pulled up the invoice attached to the transfer. It was a Word document template, barely modified. The description of services read, Strategic Advisory and Mentorship. My father was charging his daughter's fraudulent company $5,000 to mentor her on how to steal money. Another $3,000 went to Elaine Mercer Design for office staging and aesthetics. I looked at the date. That was the same week my mother had redecorated the sunroom in the main house. The office she was staging was her own morning coffee spot. The money vanished from the business account in less than a day, absorbed into the insatiable sponge of the Mercer lifestyle. I kept digging. I went back 6 months, then 12, then 2 years. The pattern was identical every time. Money came in from investors, mostly people with the last name Langford or associates of the Langford political circle, and was immediately cannibalized. There was no product. There was no service. There were no clients. The only thing M-squared Concepts produced was debt and illusion. I stood up and went to the whiteboard. I uncapped a red marker. I drew a circle in the center and wrote, Marissa. Above her, I wrote the Langfords. Below her, I wrote the house. I drew thick red lines connecting them. The money flowed from the Langfords, through Marissa, and directly into the house. The house was the ultimate beneficiary. The mortgage, the landscaping, the country club dues, the new luxury SUV leases. It was all being subsidized by stolen investment capital. And then there was me. I drew a small box off to the side and wrote Autumn. I drew a dotted line from the house to me. This was the waste pipe. When the credit limits were reached, when the cash flow dried up, they opened the valve and dumped the toxic debt into my name. They used my identity as a landfill. I stepped back and looked at the diagram. It was ugly. It was criminal. But it was also fragile. I realized with a jolt of cold clarity that I was looking at a federal indictment waiting to happen. This wasn't just embezzlement. This was wire fraud. This was conspiracy. If the Langfords found out their investments were paying for Gregory Mercer's cigars and Elaine Mercer's curtains, the fallout would be nuclear. Grant's father, the Senate hopeful, would incinerate my family to save his own reputation. This was my leverage, but it was also my danger. I sat back down and stared at the screens. The problem was the documentation. If I walked into a police station right now with this hard drive, I would be arrested alongside them. My name was on the credit cards. My name was on the letter of guarantee for the lease. My name was listed as a silent partner on the LLC documents. Gregory and Elaine had anticipated this. They had built a narrative where I was the rogue element. If the ship went down, they would point to the signatures, my signatures, however forged, and say, Autumn handled the books, Autumn set up the accounts. We were just trusting parents who took advice from our forensic analyst daughter. They would use my own profession against me. They would claim that I, the expert, had orchestrated the complex financial maneuvering while they, the innocent socialites, were duped. A jury might believe them. Juries love to believe that the quiet, brooding sibling was the mastermind. While the golden child and the upstanding parents were victims, I could not go to the police, not yet. I needed to purify the timeline. I needed a document that explicitly placed the liability back on them. A document that predated any confession they wanted me to sign tonight. I needed them to admit that the assets were theirs, and therefore, the crimes were theirs. I opened a new document on my laptop. I began to draft. I did not draft a confession. I drafted a trap that looked like a lifeboat. I utilized the legal language I had spent 10 years mastering. I created a structure known as a beneficial ownership declaration and indemnity agreement. The document was complex, filled with dense legalese and clauses about asset protection and temporary fiduciary holding. To a layperson, even a greedy one like my father, it would look like a sophisticated way to hide assets from the government. It would look like I was helping them shield the house and the accounts from the impending IRS audit. The preamble stated that Autumn Long was agreeing to act as a nominal holder for the specific purpose of restructuring. But, and here was the blade hidden in the apple, it explicitly defined the beneficial owners as Gregory, Elaine, and Marissa Mercer. It stated that the beneficial owners retained full and absolute control over all financial inputs, outputs, and historical transactions associated with the attached accounts. By signing this, they would be claiming ownership of every single dirty dollar. They would be legally asserting that while my name might be on the paper, the money, the decisions, and the control had always been theirs. It was a confession disguised as a power move. Gregory would sign it because he could not resist the idea of owning everything. He would sign it because the document promised to protect the house from seizure. He would think he was securing his kingdom. In reality, he would be signing a statement that said, "I did it. I authorized it. It is all mine." I typed furiously. The cursor ate up the white space, leaving behind black rows of binding text. Clause 14. The beneficial owners acknowledge that the nominal holder, Autumn Long, has exercised no executive decision-making power regarding the disposition of funds, Clause 22. The beneficial owners agree to indemnify and hold harmless the nominal holder against any and all claims, liabilities, or criminal inquiries arising from the historical management of said assets. I read it over. It was tight. It was vicious. It was perfect. But I needed one more layer. I needed to make sure they couldn't claim they were coerced. I needed them to think this was their idea, or at least, a favor I was doing for them because I was the dutiful daughter. I leaned back in the ergonomic chair. My eyes burned. I had not slept in 24 hours. My body was running on cortisol and caffeine, vibrating with a frequency that felt like panic but was actually hyper-focus. I checked the time on the corner of the screen. It was 2 p.m. I had 6 hours. I printed the document. Then I printed the supporting exhibits, the list of accounts, the property deed, the vehicle leases. I made 3 copies. I picked up the stack of warm paper. It felt heavy, like a brick of gold. I walked over to the shredder in the corner of the room. I took the notes I had scribbled on the whiteboard, the diagram of the money flow, the names of the Langford investors, and I wiped the board clean. I erased the red lines. I erased the connections. When I walked out of that room, I would leave no trace of the war I had just planned. I packed my laptop. I put the asset protection documents in a crisp, blue legal folder. I put the confession dossier my father had given me the night before in a separate, tattered envelope. I needed to look defeated when I walked through their door. I needed to look like I had spent the day crying, not plotting. I went to the bathroom in the lobby. I looked in the mirror. My hair was messy. My eyes were red-rimmed. I splashed cold water on my face, but I didn't fix my hair. I didn't put on makeup. I let the exhaustion sit on my face. It was the best camouflage I could wear. I walked out to my car. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long, sharp shadows across the parking lot. They were waiting for a scapegoat to arrive at 8 o'clock. They were waiting for a daughter they could sacrifice to the gods of public opinion. They were going to get a forensic auditor who had just balanced the books and found them severely wanting. I unlocked the car door and tossed the blue folder onto the passenger seat. "Checkmate, Dad," I said softly. I started the engine and drove toward the wealthy suburbs. The traffic was heavy, a river of red taillights flowing toward home. Everyone was going back to their families. I was going back to a crime scene. But this time, I wasn't just a witness. I was the lead investigator, the judge, and the jury. And when Dana Pruitt lowered her stamp onto that paper tonight, the sentence would be final, as I drove toward the enclave of wealth where my parents resided. I thought about the nature of inventory. In my line of work, you learn to categorize assets into 2 columns, the liquid and the fixed. Liquid assets are things you can spend, like cash or stocks. Fixed assets are things that sit there, like buildings or machinery. But the Mercer family portfolio was unique. They had liquidated everything that could be moved. The savings accounts were hollowed-out shells. The retirement funds had been drained years ago, likely to pay for Marissa's private college tuition or Gregory's country club initiation fees. The credit limits were tapped dry, a drought they had tried to hide by drilling into my financial identity. So, what was left? I turned the corner onto Oakwood Drive. The houses here were set back from the road. behind manicured hedges and wrought iron gates. They were massive, imposing structures of brick and stone. That was it. That was all they had. The house, the Mercer estate, was valued at roughly $1.8 million. It was the only thing they actually owned that had positive equity, although I suspected they had refinanced it at least twice. But the value of the house was not just in the square footage or the granite countertops. To Gregory and Elaine, the house was not shelter. It was a stage. It was the set design for the play they had been performing for 30 years. It was where they hosted the charity galas to show they were philanthropic. It was where they posed for the Christmas card photos, wearing matching cashmere sweaters, smiling like a dynasty. It was the physical proof that they were good people, successful people, Mercer people. If they lost the money, they could pretend they were just being frugal. But if they lost the house, if the bank put a foreclosure sign on that lawn, if the neighbors saw movers carrying out the velvet sofas, that was death. Social death is a concept most people do not understand. For a normal person, bankruptcy is a hardship. For a narcissist, it is an amputation. They would rather die than be seen as poor. They would rather sacrifice their own daughter to a federal prison sentence than admit to the Langford family that they could not afford to pay for the wedding reception. This was the leverage I had been looking for. I realized that my plan could not just be about proving my innocence. If I just proved I was innocent, they would fight me. They would sue me. They would drag my name through the mud in the press, calling me a liar, a bitter sister, a mental case. They would spend the last of their money on lawyers to destroy me just out of spite. I needed to put them in a position where they could not sue me. I needed to create a legal deadlock where their own greed trapped them. I glanced at the blue folder on the passenger seat. The document inside was a masterpiece of bait and switch. It was titled Asset Protection and Temporary Fiduciary Transfer. To a desperate man like Gregory, it would read like a shield. I was going to pitch it to him as a way to hide the house from the government. I would tell him that if I confessed to embezzlement, the authorities would come looking for restitution. I would tell him they might try to seize the family home to pay back the stolen funds. And then I would offer the solution. Sign the house over to a holding company, a company that looked like it was managed by me, but was beneficially owned by them. The trap was in the definition of beneficial owner, by signing a document that claimed they were the beneficial owners of the assets. They were legally asserting that they controlled the money. They were asserting that they directed the funds. They were asserting that the financial ecosystem was theirs. You cannot claim to be the victim of embezzlement if you sign a legal affidavit stating that you are the architect of the accounts. It was a legal concept called estoppel. You cannot argue one thing in a criminal court, Autumn stole from us, while arguing the exact opposite in a civil contract. We own and control all these assets. If they signed this, they were confessing. They just wouldn't know it until I triggered the trap. I was counting on their arrogance. I was counting on the fact that they thought I was stupid. They thought I was a data entry clerk who didn't understand high finance. They would assume I had just downloaded a template from the internet to help them out. They would never suspect that I had drafted a binding instrument that would strip them of the one thing they loved more than their children, their reputation. I checked my phone. It was 7:45 in the evening. I had a text from Dana Pruitt. I am 5 minutes away, parked down the street. Dana was the final component. I could not use a regular notary, and I certainly could not let them use their family lawyer. I needed a mobile notary. Mobile notaries are the unsung witnesses of the legal world. They travel to hospitals, to prisons, to coffee shops. They are efficient, neutral, and terrifyingly precise. When a notary stamps a document, it becomes a fact. It moves from being a piece of paper to being a piece of evidence. I had chosen Dana because she was a stranger to them. She would not be swayed by Gregory's charm or Elaine's tears. She would just check the IDs, watch the pens hit the paper, and drop the seal. Thud. And once that seal was on the paper, there was no, I didn't mean it. There was no, I didn't read it. I pulled up to the curb a few houses down from the Mercer estate. I needed a moment to get into character. I looked at myself in the vanity mirror. I looked wrecked. Good. I practiced the slump of my shoulders. I practiced the tremor in my hands. I had to play the role of the martyr. I had to be the Autumn they wanted to see. The Autumn who was willing to take the bullet to save the golden child. "I'm doing this for Marissa," I whispered, testing the line. "I just want to make sure the house is safe before I go away." It sounded pathetic. It sounded weak. It sounded exactly like the music they wanted to hear. I looked at the house again. The lights were on. The chandelier in the foyer was blazing, casting a warm, inviting glow through the fanlight window above the door. It looked like a Christmas card. It looked like the American dream. But I knew the truth. It was not a home. It was a collateralized asset with a crumbling foundation. I was about to walk in there and plant demolition charges in the basement. I put the car in gear and drove the final 100 yards. I turned into the driveway, the gravel crunching beneath my tires. I parked next to Marissa's white SUV. It was gleaming under the floodlights, probably freshly detailed. I grabbed the tattered envelope with the confession they wanted me to sign. I grabbed the blue folder with the asset protection documents. I stepped out of the car. The night was silent. The kind of expensive silence you only get in neighborhoods where the lots are 2 acres wide. I walked to the front door. My heart was not racing anymore. My hands were not sweating. I felt a cold, crystalline focus. I was about to sell them their own destruction, and they were going to thank me for it. I rang the doorbell. Ding dong. The sound echoed inside. I waited. I heard footsteps. The door opened. It was my mother. She was wearing a silk blouse and pearls, her face composed into a mask of tragic bravery. "Autumn," she said, her voice soft and breathless. "You came." "I came," I said, looking at the floor. "I told you I would." "Come in," she said, stepping back. "Your father is in the study. We have the papers ready." "I brought some papers too," I said quietly, stepping across the threshold. "Just some things to make sure you guys are okay while I'm gone." Elaine looked at the folder in my hand, then at my face. She saw the defeat in my eyes. She smiled, a small, sad, triumphant smile. "You are a good daughter, Autumn," she said. I followed her down the hall. "Yes, Mother. I thought, I am a very good daughter. I am going to clean up this entire mess. You just won't like the cleaning product I use." I checked my watch. 7:55. Dana Pruitt would be ringing that doorbell in exactly 5 minutes. The curtain was going up. As I walked down the hallway following my mother's perfumed wake, I clutched the blue folder against my chest, to her. It looked like a shield I was using to protect myself. To me, it felt like a loaded weapon. The best trap is not a hole in the ground covered with leaves. The best trap is a life raft thrown to a drowning man. You do not have to force him to grab it. You do not have to trick him. You just have to show him the water rising. And he will shackle himself to the anchor you have painted to look like a buoy, in the 6 hours between leaving the co-working space and arriving here. I had constructed that life raft with surgical precision. I had drafted a set of documents that were designed to appeal to the specific pathology of the Mercer family, their addiction to ownership and their terror of loss. The first document was titled The Asset Preservation and Temporary Fiduciary Transfer Agreement. I had invented a holding entity for this purpose, a shell company with a name that sounded stable, boring, and patrician. Sterling Mercer Holdings, LLC. The language in the document was dense, filled with the kind of Latin phrases that make rich men feel secure. It purported to transfer the title of the family estate and the operational control of the bank accounts into this holding company. I had framed it as a defensive measure against potential civil liabilities arising from the audit, but the trap was buried in Section 4. Paragraph 2. In order to make the transfer legal and binding, the document required the beneficial owners, Gregory and Elaine, to attest that they had full historical and absolute control over the disposition of all funds flowing into and out of the subject accounts. It was a catch-22. If they signed this to save the house from being seized by the government as part of my embezzlement, they were legally admitting that they controlled the money I was supposedly stealing. You cannot steal money that you are ordered to move by the owner. By signing, they were stripping me of the rogue actor status they needed for their narrative and establishing themselves as the architects of the financial scheme. The second document was even more lethal. It was a voluntary legal support and indemnity agreement. I had written it to look like a kindness. It stated that Gregory and Elaine Mercer, out of the goodness of their hearts, agreed to cover 50% of my legal fees. But the whereas clauses, the preamble that sets the context for a contract, were deadly. Whereas the actions taken by the agent, Autumn Long, were performed at the behest of and for the benefit of the principals, Gregory and Elaine Mercer, whereas the principals acknowledged that the agent received no direct financial benefit beyond standard compensation if they signed this. They were not just paying for a lawyer. They were signing a confession that I was following orders. They were signing a statement that admitted I didn't keep the money. I knew they would sign it. Why? Because the alternative was admitting that they were broke. The alternative was admitting that the golden child's wedding was being funded by crime. I had set the rules of engagement for myself before I got out of the car. Rule number 1, no violence. I would not raise my voice. I would not throw things. I would be the quiet, broken daughter. Rule number 2, no empty threats. I would not say, I will go to the police. That would make them defensive. Instead, I would use the truth, but I would twist it. I would say, the police will come for the assets. Rule number 3, let them close the door themselves. I would not force the pen into their hands. I would present the danger, offer the solution, and let their own greed do the heavy lifting. I paused for a fraction of a second in the hallway, adjusting my grip on the folder. I reached into my pocket and touched my phone. I had set it to airplane mode, so no incoming calls would interrupt, and I had activated the voice recorder app 15 minutes ago in the car. It was running in the background. The battery was at 98%. Storage space was ample. I needed to capture everything. The tone of their voices, the coercion, the desperation. I visualized the room before I entered it. Gregory would be behind the desk, trying to look authoritative to mask his fear. He would be the hardest to crack because he thought he knew business. He would read the headers. He would ask about the holding company. I had to be ready to stroke his ego, to make him feel like this was a savvy business move. Elaine would be the accelerator. She just wanted the problem to vanish. She wanted the unpleasantness to be over so she could go back to planning the wedding. She would pressure Gregory to sign just to stop the conversation. And Marissa was the wild card. She was selfish, but she was also cowardly. She would be terrified that any delay would ruin her wedding. I would use that. I would dangle the seizure of assets in front of her like a specter. The house could be frozen, I would say. The wedding venue deposits could be seized. That would be the key. The fear of the freeze. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump forward, erasing the confident forensic analyst and resurrecting the beaten-down data clerk. I lowered my chin. I let my eyes lose their focus. I stepped through the double doors into the study. The room was exactly as I had left it 24 hours ago, yet the atmosphere had shifted. Yesterday, it had been a courtroom. Today, it felt like an emergency room. The air was thick with tension and the smell of stale scotch. Gregory was indeed behind the desk. He looked haggard. His tie was loosened, and there were papers scattered across the mahogany surface. The dossier he had given me, plus a stack of new documents that I assumed were the confession he wanted me to sign. Marissa was not on the couch this time. She was pacing by the window, nervously shredding a tissue. When I entered, she spun around, her eyes wide and frantic. "Finally," she snapped. "Do you know what time it is? We have been waiting." "I am sorry," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Traffic was bad. "Did you bring it?" Gregory asked. He did not say hello. He did not look at me as a father looks at a child. He looked at me as a butcher looks at a delivery of meat. "Are you ready to sign?" "I am ready to do what is necessary," I said. I walked to the chair, the subordinate chair, and sat down, keeping my blue folder on my lap. I did not put it on the desk yet. I needed them to want it. Good, Gregory said. He pushed a stack of papers toward me. The lawyer drew these up. It is a standard admission of guilt. It states that you acted alone, that you manipulated the books without our knowledge, and that you accept full responsibility for the restitution. I looked at the papers. They were a suicide note for my future. I will sign them, I said, and I saw the collective exhale in the room. Elaine closed her eyes and pressed a hand to her chest. Marissa stopped pacing. But, I added, letting the word hang in the air. But what? Gregory's eyes narrowed. There is no but. Autumn, we had a deal. I spoke to a friend, I lied. Someone who works in asset forfeiture. He told me something that scared me. He said that in cases of embezzlement this size, $250,000, the government doesn't just look at the person who stole the money. They look at where the money went. The room went deadly silent. What are you talking about? Elaine asked, her voice shrill. He said they call it clawback, I said, keeping my voice trembling. If I admit that I stole the money, and the investigation shows that the money was used to pay for things in this house, or the wedding deposits, or the cars, the government will consider those assets to be proceeds of crime. I looked at Marissa. They could freeze the wedding accounts. Marissa, they could put a lien on this house. They could lock everything down for years while they investigate. Marissa's face went pale. They can't do that. It's my wedding. They can, I said. And if they do, the Langfords will find out. Not just that I stole the money, but that the money was used to fund the family. It will look like a conspiracy. Gregory slammed his hand on the desk. This is ridiculous. We didn't know. That is the whole point of you signing the confession. I know, Dad. I know, I pleaded, widening my eyes to look terrified. But the government is greedy. They don't care about the truth. They just want the money back. And since I don't have any money, they will come for yours. I saw the fear flicker in Gregory's eyes. He knew his finances were a house of cards. He knew that any scrutiny, any freeze, would cause the whole structure to collapse. He couldn't afford a lawyer to fight a federal asset seizure. He barely had enough liquidity to keep the lights on. So what are you saying? Gregory demanded. Are you backing out? No, I said quickly. No, I want to help. I want to protect you. That is why I spent all day working on this. I lifted the blue folder from my lap. I held it out like an offering. What is that? Elaine asked. It is a life raft, I said. I used some of the templates from my firm. It creates a temporary holding structure. If we move the title of the house and the controlling interest of the accounts into this trust before I sign the confession, it protects them. It creates a legal wall. The government can't seize assets that belong to a third-party trust. Gregory reached out and snatched the folder from my hand. He opened it and scanned the pages. Sterling Mercer Holdings, he muttered. He liked the sound of it. I could see it in his face. It sounded important. It keeps the house safe, I said. It keeps the wedding safe. It separates your assets from my crimes. Gregory flipped through the pages. He was reading. But he wasn't reading for comprehension. He was reading for confirmation of what he wanted to believe. He saw asset protection. He saw indemnity. He saw prevention of seizure. And who controls this trust? Gregory asked suspiciously. You do, I said. Look at Section 4. Beneficial owners. That is you and Mom. I am just the nominal holder. I just hold the paper. You hold the power. He looked at Section 4. He saw his name listed as the ultimate authority. This might actually work, he said slowly. He looked at me with a strange mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. I didn't know you knew how to structure these things. I listen, I said softly. I have been listening to you for years. Dad, we have to do it, Marissa said, her voice high and tight. Dad, we have to do it. If Grant finds out the wedding accounts are frozen, he will leave me. You know he will. We don't have time to have the lawyer review it, Elaine fretted. It is almost 8. It is standard boilerplate, Gregory said, waving his hand. He was convincing himself. He was so desperate to save his house that he was ignoring the glaring red flag. It just secures our property. It makes sense. If Autumn is going down, we don't want to be dragged down with her collateral damage. Exactly, I said. I just want to make sure that when I go away, you guys are okay. I pulled out the second document. And this, I said, sliding the voluntary legal support agreement across the desk, is just a promise that you will help me with a lawyer. Since I'm doing this, I just don't want to be left with a public defender. Of course, Gregory said dismissively. He didn't even read that one. He just saw it as a bill he could ignore later. He didn't realize it was the lock on his cell door. The notary is coming at 8, I said. We can sign these first. Then I will sign the confession. Then it is all over. Good, Gregory said. He looked at the documents again, his greed overriding his caution. This is smart. Autumn, I am glad you finally decided to use that brain of yours for the family. I am doing it for the family, I said. And I was. I was doing it to ensure the family got exactly what they deserved. The doorbell rang. Ding dong. It was 8 o'clock exactly. Dana Pruitt was right on time. I stood up. I will get it. I walked out of the study, leaving the documents on the desk. I left the phone recording on the edge of the desk, hidden under a stack of magazines. I wanted to catch their conversation while I was gone. As I walked to the front door, I heard Gregory's voice drift down the hall. See, he said to Elaine, I told you she would fold. She is weak, but at least she protected the house. I opened the front door. Dana Pruitt stood there in a gray trench coat, holding a leather satchel. She looked like justice personified, impartial, cold, and ready to validate the truth. Good evening, she said. I am here for the notarization. Come in, I said. They are ready for you. I led her into the house. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now, all I needed was the click of the lock. The air in the study was stagnant, recycled, and heavy with the scent of my father's anxiety, which smelled surprisingly like stale scotch and expensive cologne. I had stepped back into the room, leaving the hall, and closed the heavy oak doors behind me. This was the performance of a lifetime. I needed to be the Autumn they remembered, the fragile, easily cowed girl who broke under pressure, while simultaneously guiding them toward the guillotine. I let my shoulders collapse inward, shrinking my height by 2 inches. I allowed my lower lip to tremble. A muscle memory from a childhood spent holding back tears in this exact room. I walked toward the desk where Gregory sat like a deposed king, clutching the confession he expected me to sign. I am sorry, I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly on the last syllable. I am so sorry. Dad, I want to sign it. I really do. Gregory looked up, his eyes narrowing. He hated weakness, yet he relied on it. Then sign it. Autumn, stop stalling. The notary will be here any minute. I took a shaky breath and wiped a non-existent tear from my cheek. I will, but I spoke to a friend. Someone who works in asset forfeiture. I saw Gregory's hand freeze on the paper. The term asset forfeiture was a dog whistle for men like him. It meant the government coming for his toys. What are you babbling about? He snapped, though his voice had lost its command. He told me that with a fraud this size, I said, pitching my voice to sound terrified. The investigation does not stop with the confession. They look for the beneficiaries. I let the word hang there. They look for where the money went, Dad, and when they see that the funds from Marissa's company paid for the landscaping and the club dues and the deposits for the wedding venue, they will call it proceeds of crime. I watched the blood drain from his face. It was a slow, satisfying, biological reaction. The capillaries in his cheeks constricted, leaving his skin the color of old parchment. They can't do that, Marissa said from the window, her voice shrill. It is my wedding. They can't touch my wedding. They can, I said, turning to her with wide, panicked eyes. They call it clawback. Marissa. They can freeze everything. The accounts, the cars, even the house. I looked around the room, letting my gaze linger on the mahogany bookshelves, the silk drapes, the symbols of their status. They could put a federal lien on the house. Dad, they could lock the doors. Gregory stood up. He did not look like a titan of industry anymore. He looked like a man watching his life support system being unplugged. The house was not just a building to him, it was his skin, without it. He was just a failed businessman with a mountain of debt. "This is impossible," Gregory sputtered, but his eyes were darting around the room as if he expected FBI agents to burst through the wainscoting. "If you confess, the case is closed. That is the deal." "The criminal case against me would be closed," I explained, letting my voice quiver. "But the civil recovery that is different. The government wants its money back, and since I don't have $250,000, they will come for the assets that benefited from the theft." Elaine let out a small, strangled gasp. She pressed her hand to her throat. "Gregory, we cannot lose the house. The Langfords if Grant's family sees a seizure notice on our front gate." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The shame would kill them faster than the poverty. "Is there a way around it?" Elaine asked, looking at me with a desperation that was almost pitiable. "Autumn, did your friends say anything? Is there a way to stop them?" This was the moment, the pivot point. I clutched the blue folder tighter to my chest, then slowly, hesitantly, laid it on the desk. "He gave me a template," I said softly. "He said it is what the big firms use to protect assets during an audit. It is called a temporary fiduciary transfer." Gregory looked at the folder as if it were a bomb, or perhaps a Bible. He snatched it up and flipped it open. "Sterling Mercer Holdings," he read aloud. The name tasted good in his mouth. It sounded legitimate. It sounded safe. "It moves the ownership of the house and the operational control of the accounts into a trust," I explained, rushing my words like a nervous child trying to help. "Just temporarily, until the investigation is over. If the assets are held by a separate entity, the government can't freeze them as easily. It creates a firewall." Gregory was scanning the pages. He was reading the legalese I had crafted in the cold light of the co-working space. He saw the words indemnity, protection, preservation. He saw the safety I was offering, but then he stopped. He flipped to the signature page. "Nominal holder and director of operations." He read, "Autumn Long." He looked up at me, his eyes sharp with sudden suspicion. The predator in him had woken up. "Why you? Why are you the director of this holding company?" My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face frozen in a mask of anxious submission. I had anticipated this. I knew his paranoia would flare up. "Because I am the one taking the fall, Dad," I said, my voice barely audible. "My name is already on the investigation. If the holding company is in your name, it looks like you are hiding assets. It looks suspicious. But if it is in my name, it just looks like part of the mess I made." I took a step closer, looking up at him through my lashes. "And because I am the invisible one," I added. "Nobody looks at me. Nobody cares about what Autumn does. I am just the data entry clerk. If the house is in my name, it is boring. It is safe." Gregory stared at me. He was weighing it. He was looking for the trap. But he was looking in the wrong place. He was looking for ambition. And I was showing him submission. "Why should I trust you with the title to my house?" he asked cruelly. "You are about to be a convicted felon." "Because I always do what you tell me to do," I said. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. It was the truest thing I had ever said to him, and also the biggest lie. I had done what they told me for 31 years. I had let them erode me. I had let them use me. "I am doing this to save Marissa," I whispered. "I am going to prison for her. Why would I steal the house? I just want to make sure there is a home for me to come back to when I get out." I saw the tension leave his shoulders. He believed me. He believed in my pathetic nature. He believed that I was incapable of malice because he believed I was incapable of anything other than obedience. It makes sense, Gregory, Elaine urged, reaching out to touch his arm. She is right. If we keep the house in our name, the lawyers will tear us apart. We need to hide it. Gregory looked at the document again. He looked at the clause that listed him as the beneficial owner. He stroked the paper with his thumb. And this allows us to retain full use of the property? He asked. Yes, I said. Clause 6. You have unimpeded right of usage and enjoyment. Nothing changes for you. You still live here. You still run the accounts. I just hold the umbrella so you don't get wet. He nodded slowly. He was sold. He was going to sign over his kingdom to his servant because he was too arrogant to believe the servant could read the map. But wait, he said, pausing one last time. What about the bank accounts? This transfers control of the liquid assets, too. We have to move the money to the holding company to pay the mortgage, I said quickly. If the personal accounts are frozen, who pays the bills? The holding company needs to have the cash flow to keep the lights on while the investigation happens. It was a flimsy excuse, but it was wrapped in the logic of fear. I don't know, Gregory muttered. It feels excessive. Dad, please, Marissa cut in. She had stopped pacing and was standing next to me, gripping my arm, her nails dug into my skin. Do it. Just do it. Grant's father is asking questions about the venue deposit. If the check bounces because the account is frozen, the wedding is off. I am not kidding. Dad, I will die if this wedding is canceled. She looked at me, her eyes wet with selfish tears. Autumn, make him do it. It is the only way. Dad, I said. I prepared everything. The notary just has to stamp it. Then I sign the confession. Then you are safe. Fine, Gregory said. He exhaled sharply, a sound of frustration and resignation. Fine, we will do it. But the moment this investigation is over, we dissolve this entity. Do you understand me? Autumn, you sign it back the day you get out. I promise, I said. I just want to help. You are helping, Elaine said, looking at me with that same tragic, beatific smile. You are saving us, Autumn. I looked down at the floor to hide the flash of cold triumph that must have crossed my eyes. Yes, Mother, I am saving you. I am saving you from the burden of wealth. Gregory reached for his fountain pen. The gold cap glinted under the chandelier light. He unscrewed it with deliberate, heavy movements. Where is that notary? He grumbled. It is 8 o'clock. As if on cue, the melody of the door chimes drifted through the house. Ding-dong. The sound was electric. It was the starting pistol. That is her, I said. Go let her in, Gregory commanded. Let us get this over with. I turned around. I walked toward the door. My hands were no longer shaking. My stride was steady. I could feel the phone recording in the pocket of my blazer. Wait, no. I had left the phone on the desk, hidden under the magazines. I paused at the threshold of the study. I needed to make sure it was still recording. I glanced back. The little red light was obscured by the cover of Architectural Digest, but I knew it was there, capturing every word of their conspiracy, every demand, every admission of their control over the funds I was supposedly stealing. Hurry up, Autumn, Marissa hissed. I am going, I said. I walked down the long marble hallway. The faces of my ancestors stared down from the oil paintings on the walls. They looked stern. They looked proud. I wondered what they would think of what was about to happen. The Mercer line was about to end, not with a bang, but with the quiet, authoritative thump of a rubber stamp. I reached the front door. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool, conditioned air of the house one last time. I unlocked the deadbolt. I pulled the heavy door open. Dana Pruitt stood on the porch. She was exactly as I remembered her, a small woman with steel-gray hair cut in a sharp bob, wearing a sensible raincoat and holding a thick leather notary bag. She looked like a librarian who doubled as an executioner. Ms. Long? She asked. Her voice was dry and professional. Yes, I said. Thank you for being on time. I am always on time, Dana said. She stepped inside, wiping her feet on the mat. She did not look around at the grandeur of the foyer. She did not care about the chandelier or the art. She only cared about the job. They are in the study, I said. We have 2 sets of documents, one for a property transfer and asset structure, and one for a personal legal agreement. IDS are present? She asked. Yes. All signers are present and willing? I looked at her. They are very willing. They are anxious to sign. Dana nodded. Then let us proceed. I led her down the hall. I felt like I was walking beside the Grim Reaper. We reached the double doors of the study. I pushed them open and stepped aside to let her enter first. Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, I said, my voice steady, my mask firmly in place. This is Dana Pruitt. She is here to witness. Gregory stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, trying to reclaim his dignity for the stranger. Good evening. We have some urgent business to conclude. I understand, Dana said, walking to the desk and setting down her bag. The heavy thud of the leather hitting the wood sounded like a gavel. She unzipped it and pulled out her logbook and her seal. I moved to the side of the room, near the desk, but out of the direct line of sight. I watched Gregory. I watched Elaine. I watched Marissa. They looked relieved. They thought the rescue team had arrived. They didn't realize that I hadn't brought a rescuer. I had brought the coroner. Dana Pruitt was not a woman who made small talk. She was a woman who made things official. She walked into the study with the efficient, clipped gait of a battlefield surgeon entering a triage tent. She did not look at the expensive oil paintings. She did not comment on the stifling heat of the room or the palpable tension that made the air feel like it was vibrating. She simply walked to the desk, cleared a space among the scattered papers with a sweep of her hand, and set down her leather satchel. I stood by the bookshelf, watching. I felt a strange, detached buzzing in my fingertips. It was the same sensation I felt right before I hit enter on a forensic report that I knew would send a CEO to prison. It was the feeling of imminent, irreversible consequence. I need valid government-issued identification from all signatories, Dana said. Her voice was flat, devoid of inflection. She was not here to judge the morality of the transaction. She was here to verify the identity of the actors. Gregory produced his driver's license from his wallet. His hands were shaking slightly, a tremor that rattled the plastic card against the mahogany desk. He placed it down. Elaine followed suit, her movements jerky and nervous. Marissa dug through her designer purse, sighing loudly, before slapping her ID down next to the others. Dana picked them up one by one. She adjusted her rimless glasses. She looked at the ID, then at the face, then back at the ID. Gregory Mercer, she stated. Yes, my father said. He sounded impatient, but there was a crack in his voice. He was a man used to giving orders, not submitting to verification. Elaine Mercer. That is me, my mother whispered. Marissa Mercer. Marissa rolled her eyes. Obviously. And Autumn Long, Dana said, looking at me. I stepped forward and handed her my license. Here. She checked it. She nodded. She opened her logbook, a large bound ledger that looked like the Book of Judgment. She began to record the details. The scratching of her pen was the only sound in the room. It was a dry, abrasive sound, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. We are notarizing 2 documents today, Dana said, her eyes scanning the headers of the papers I had prepared. An asset preservation and temporary fiduciary transfer agreement, and a voluntary legal support and indemnity agreement, correct? Yes, Gregory said. Just get on with it. I need to verify that all parties are signing of their own free will and are not under duress, Dana recited. It was a standard script, but in this room, it felt like a loaded question. We are, Gregory said quickly. Yes, Elaine echoed. Can we just hurry up? Marissa complained. I have a dinner reservation at 9. Dana turned to me. Ms. Long, Are you signing this voluntarily? I looked at my father. I looked at the confession letter sitting next to the deed transfer. I looked at the trap I had built. Yes, I said softly. I am doing this for my family. Very well, Dana said. She turned the blue folder toward Gregory. Mr. Mercer, you are signing as the beneficial owner and transferor. Please sign and initial where indicated by the tags. Gregory picked up his fountain pen. He hovered over the document. This was the moment, the hesitation. I saw his eyes dart to the text one last time. He was looking at the clause that transferred the title of his beloved estate to Sterling Mercer Holdings. For a split second, the instinct of preservation kicked in. He knew, deep down in his lizard brain, that giving away title was wrong. He knew that signing over his castle was dangerous. But then his eyes shifted to the right, to the words, asset protection. He thought about the government seizing the house. He thought about the neighbors seeing a foreclosure notice. He thought about the shame. Fear is a powerful motivator, but vanity is a lethal one. Gregory Mercer would rather jump off a cliff than be pushed. He wanted to believe he was making a strategic maneuver. This keeps it safe, he muttered to himself, more than to anyone else. It is just a holding pattern. He lowered the pen. The nib touched the paper. I watched the ink flow. It was black. Permanent ink. He signed his name with a flourish. The loops of the G and the M, large and arrogant. He initialed the pages. He was signing away his ownership, and he was doing it with the pride of a captain steering his ship into an iceberg because he thought it was a shortcut. Mrs. Mercer, Dana said, sliding the papers to Elaine. Elaine did not hesitate. She did not read. She just wanted the anxiety to stop. She signed her name quickly, her signature small and cramped, as if she were trying to take up as little space as possible. She believed she was erasing a problem. She believed that by signing this, she was buying her way back to the comfortable, oblivious life she felt she deserved. Marissa, Dana said. Marissa stepped up to the desk. She signed the document like she was signing a credit card receipt for a latte she didn't intend to pay for. She didn't look at the clauses. She didn't look at the indemnity agreement. She just scrawled her signature, Marissa Mercer, with a little heart over the I. It was grotesque. She was signing a document that admitted she was the beneficiary of a crime, and she dotted it with a heart. And Ms. Long, Dana said. She turned the document to me. I picked up a cheap ballpoint pen from the cup on the desk. I did not use my father's gold fountain pen. I wanted my signature to look different. I wanted it to look utilitarian. I looked at the line for nominal holder. I signed my name, Autumn Long. It was done. The signatures were there. But they were not real yet. They needed the seal. Dana pulled the heavy embossing seal from her bag. It was a black, cast-iron device that looked medieval. She positioned it over the bottom of the first page. She squeezed the handle. Crunch. The sound was heavy. It was the sound of metal biting into paper. It was the sound of a gate slamming shut. She moved to the next page. Crunch. My father flinched slightly at the sound. It was final. It was absolute. She moved to the indemnity agreement. Crunch. With every compression of that handle, the legal reality of the Mercer family shifted. The house was no longer theirs. The accounts were no longer theirs. The liability, however, was now permanently theirs. Dana finished. She picked up her stamp, the one with the ink, and pressed it next to the embossed seals. Date, commission expiry, state of operation. She closed the folder. She handed it to me. Here is your copy, Ms. Long, she said. I took it. It felt heavy in my hands. It felt hot. And the originals? Gregory asked, reaching out. I will file the transfer with the county clerk first thing in the morning as part of the service, Dana said. It is included in the fee. Good, Gregory said. Good. Make sure it is recorded immediately. We want that protection in place before... He trailed off, looking at me. Before the investigation starts, I finished for him. Dana packed her seal back into the bag. She zipped it up. She looked at us one last time, her expression unreadable. She must have sensed the toxicity in the room. It was thick enough to choke on. But she was a professional. She had seen families destroy each other over wills, divorces, and bankruptcies. We were just another Tuesday night. "That concludes the notarization," she said. "Have a good evening." "I will walk you out," I said. I walked her to the door. The walk felt floaty, like I was moving through water. I opened the front door for her. "Thank you, Dana," I said. "You're welcome," she said. She paused on the step. "You have a cold hand, Ms. Long." "I know," I said. "It runs in the family." She walked away into the night. I closed the door. I locked it. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door for a second. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. It was done. The house was mine. The debt was theirs. The trap was sprung, but I wasn't finished. I had one more scene to play. I turned around and walked back to the study. The atmosphere in the room had changed completely. The tension had evaporated, replaced by a smug, self-congratulatory relief. Gregory was pouring himself a drink from the crystal decanter on the sidebar. Elaine was sitting in the armchair, fanning herself with a magazine. Marissa was texting on her phone, probably telling Grant that everything was fine. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully transferred their cancer into my body. Gregory turned around, glass in hand. He took a sip of the amber liquid and looked at me. His eyes were no longer fearful. They were mocking. "Well," he said, the ice clinking against the glass. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" I walked to the desk. I did not sit down. I stood there, looking at him. "No," I said. "It wasn't hard. You did the right thing." "Autumn," Elaine said, her voice dripping with that fake, saccharine sweetness. "We are very proud of you." "Yeah, thanks," Marissa mumbled without looking up from her phone. "You really saved my ass." Gregory walked around the desk and sat in his massive leather chair. He leaned back, the leather creaking. He looked at the confession letter, the one I had not signed yet. "Now," he said, sliding the confession toward me. "Sign this, and then you can go. We have a lot of planning to do for the wedding, and frankly, I don't want a criminal hanging around the house." He laughed, a short bark of a laugh. "You know," he said, looking at me with a sneer, "I always wondered if you would ever amount to anything. You were always so quiet, so mediocre, but tonight, you actually served a purpose." He took another sip of his scotch. "Finally," he said, the words dripping with contempt. "Finally, you are useful." The words hit me, but they didn't hurt. They just confirmed the diagnosis. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had raised me, the man who had taught me that love was conditional and that value was monetary. I reached out, but I did not pick up the pen. I picked up the stack of magazines on the corner of the desk. Gregory frowned. "What are you doing?" I moved the magazines aside. Revealing my phone, the screen was glowing. The voice recorder app was open. The timer was running. It read 00:48:12, 48 minutes and 12 seconds. I picked up the phone. I held it up so he could see the screen. The waveform was moving, reacting to the sound of his breathing, the sound of the ice in his glass. Gregory stared at the phone. He didn't understand at first. His brain couldn't process the shift. "What is that?" he asked. "It is a recording," I said. My voice was different now. The tremor was gone. The hesitation was gone. The soft, submissive whisper of the daughter was gone. My voice was cool, clear, and hard as a diamond. "It is a recording of everything that has happened in this room for the last 48 minutes, I said. "It recorded you admitting that the embezzlement was done for your benefit. It recorded you coercing me to take the blame. It recorded you admitting that you control the funds." The room went silent. A different kind of silence. This wasn't the silence of tension. It was the silence of a vacuum. Elaine stopped fanning herself. Marissa dropped her phone on the carpet. Gregory stood up slowly. His face went from flush to gray in a heartbeat. "You recorded us?" he whispered. "Every word," I said. "Give me that phone," he snarled, lunging forward. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I just looked at him, and something in my eyes made him stop. He stopped dead, his hand hovering halfway across the desk. "I wouldn't do that," I said calmly. "The file is already backed up to the cloud. I sent it to a secure server the moment Dana walked out the door. Destroying the phone won't help you. It will just add destruction of evidence to the list of charges." "Charges?" Elaine squeaked. "What charges? Autumn, what are you doing?" I looked at my mother. "I am not signing the confession. Mother, I never was." But the deal," she stammered. "The house, you protected the house." I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a forensic analyst who has just found the missing $1 million. "I did protect the house," I said. "I protected it from you." I tapped the blue folder that lay on the desk, the one Dana had just stamped. "You didn't read the documents, did you, Dad?" I asked. "I mean, you read them, but you didn't read them. You saw what you wanted to see." "I read them!" Gregory shouted. "It is a holding company, controlled by me." "Beneficially owned by you," I corrected. "But look at Clause 12, the clause regarding default and negligence." Gregory grabbed the folder. His hands were shaking so hard he almost ripped the paper. He flipped to the back. Clause 12 states that if the beneficial owners are found to be under investigation for financial impropriety, or if they admit to coercion or fraud, the nominal holder, that is me, assumes full, irrevocable executive control of all assets to satisfy legal obligations. I paused, letting the words sink in. "You just admitted to fraud on tape. Dad, you just admitted to coercion, which means, as of right now, Sterling Mercer Holdings is under my sole control." I leaned forward, placing my hands on the desk, invading his space. "The house is mine. The accounts are mine. The cars are mine." "You can't do this," Marissa screamed. "It's stealing." "No, Marissa," I said, turning to her. "Stealing is taking money from investors and using it to buy a Porsche. This is a hostile takeover, and it is entirely legal." Gregory fell back into his chair. He looked like he was having a stroke. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "You said I was finally useful," I said to him, my voice dropping to a whisper. "And you were right. I used my skills to clean up your mess. But I am not cleaning it up for you. I am cleaning it up for myself." I picked up the confession letter he wanted me to sign. I held it up. "I am not going to prison for you," I said, "and I am not going to let you ruin my name." I ripped the confession letter in half, then in quarters. The sound of tearing paper was loud in the silent room. I let the pieces flutter down onto his desk like confetti. "You have two choices," I said. "Choice A, I take this recording and these documents to the FBI tomorrow morning. You all go to prison for wire fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. The Langfords find out everything on the news." Elaine began to sob, a low, guttural sound of pure terror. "Or choice B," I continued. "You move out. You leave the house. You leave the state. You sign over the remaining rights to me quietly. And I don't release the tape. I sell the house. I pay back the investors you stole from. And I walk away with whatever is left." "You are kicking us out?" Gregory whispered. "This is my house." "Not anymore," I said. "Check the timestamp on the notary seal. It became my house 5 minutes ago." I picked up my phone and stopped the recording. Click. "I suggest you start packing," I said. "You have 24 hours. I turned my back on them. I walked toward the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could hear the silence of their world collapsing, and it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. They had told me that 2 years in prison wouldn't kill me. They were right. But the truth? The truth was about to kill them. And I had signed the death certificate myself. The silence in the room was not the peaceful kind. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a bomb shelter after the siren has stopped. When everyone is waiting to see if the roof will hold, the scraps of the confession letter I had torn lay on the mahogany desk like snow, a stark contrast to the dark wood and the darker mood. "You are bluffing," Gregory said. His voice was low, a rumble of thunder that had lost its lightning. He was gripping the armrests of his leather chair so hard, his knuckles were the color of bone. "You would not destroy this family. You do not have the stomach for it." "I am not the one who destroyed this family," I replied, my voice calm, measured, and entirely devoid of the trembling daughter act I had performed so perfectly just 10 minutes ago. "You did that when you decided to balance your ledger with my life. And as for my stomach, you are confusing nausea with weakness. I have seen worse things than this on a spreadsheet." I took a step back from the desk, creating a perimeter of safety. I saw the way Gregory's eyes were darting toward the blue folder, the signed, sealed, and stamped transfer documents. He looked like a desperate animal eyeing a piece of meat. "Give me the papers," he demanded. Standing up, he moved fast for a man his age, lunging across the desk with a snarl. "Don't," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my hands. I simply spoke the word with the authority of a judge slamming a gavel. He froze. "Remember the recording, Dad," I said, pointing to the phone in my hand. "It is not just a recording of the past hour. It is insurance. If you touch me, if you try to take these papers by force, that file goes directly to the district attorney, and it goes to the Langford campaign headquarters." Gregory recoiled, as if I had slapped him. He sank back into his chair, defeated by a cloud server and a threat he knew I would execute. "You can't do this," Marissa wailed from the corner. She sounded like a child who had been told Christmas was canceled. "You can't just steal our house. That is illegal. I am calling a lawyer." She reached for her phone on the carpet, her fingers fumbling with the screen. "Go ahead," I said, turning to face her. "Call a lawyer. Call the best one you can find. But before you dial, let me explain to you exactly how the law works, Marissa, because unlike you, I do not get my legal knowledge from television dramas." I walked over to the fireplace, leaning casually against the mantelpiece. I was now the one occupying the space. I was the one comfortable in the room. "If you sue me," I began, speaking clearly so they wouldn't miss a word, "you will have to explain to a judge why you signed these documents. You will have to explain that you voluntarily transferred the title of this estate to Sterling Mercer Holdings to hide it from a federal investigation into your own embezzlement." I looked at Gregory. "It is called the doctrine of unclean hands," I said. "You cannot ask a court for equity when you have acted in bad faith. To sue me, you have to admit to the fraud. You have to admit that the transfer was a sham designed to defraud the government, and the moment you admit that in a court filing, you are confessing to a felony. You will be cross-examined. The recording will be entered into evidence, and the judge will not just give you the house back, he will give you a prison sentence." Marissa stopped typing. She held the phone in her hand, her mouth open in a perfect O of realization. "So, go ahead," I urged her. "Make the call, but know that the person who picks up on the other end will tell you exactly what I just told you. You are checkmated. You built a wall to keep the police out, and you walled yourselves in with me." Elaine let out a sob, a ragged sound that tore through the room. She stood up and walked toward me, her hands clasped in front of her chest. She looked old. The carefully applied makeup could not hide the lines of terror etching themselves into her face. "Autumn, please," she begged. "We are your family. I know we asked a lot of you, but we were desperate. We just wanted to keep everything together. I just want peace. I just want this family to be at peace." I looked at my mother, for years. Her tears had been her weapon. She used them to guilt me, to soften me, to make me feel like the villain for having boundaries. But tonight, her tears just looked like water. "Peace?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what you call it? When you asked me to go to prison for 2 years, was that a peace offering? When you forged my signature on a lease, was that an act of harmony?" "We didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. "You didn't care if you hurt me," I corrected. "That is the difference. You talk about wanting the family to be at peace, Mom, but what you really mean is that you want me to be quiet. You want me to be the silent foundation that you build your heavy. Expensive life on. Your version of peace is my suffocation. I tapped the blue folder. Well, I am done being quiet, and I am done being the foundation. I am the landlord now. You are cruel, Gregory spat. I raised you better than this. You raised me to value success, I countered. You raised me to look at the bottom line. I am just applying the Mercer family values to the Mercer family situation. You are insolvent. You are a liability, and I am restructuring. I walked back to the desk and picked up the blue folder. I checked to make sure the documents were secure. I checked to make sure my phone was in my pocket. Here is how this is going to work, I said, because I am generous, and because, unlike you, I do not want to see anyone in a cage. I am giving you a grace period. A grace period? Gregory asked, hope flickering in his eyes for a second. You mean we can stay? I mean you have 30 days, I said. 30 days? Elaine gasped. 30 days to what? 30 days to vacate the premises, I said. You need to pack your things, the personal items, the clothes, the photos, but the furniture stays, the art stays, anything of value stays. Those are assets of the holding company now, and they will be liquidated to pay back the investors you defrauded. You can't be serious, Marissa shrieked. My wedding is in 2 months. I can't move. I need this house for the bridal shower. I need it for the getting ready photos. Marissa, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly chill. You do not seem to understand the gravity of your situation. You are not having a bridal shower here. In fact, if you are not careful, you are not having a wedding at all. Grant will kill you, she hissed, when I tell Grant what you did. Tell him, I challenged. Please, pick up the phone right now and call Grant Langford. Tell him that your sister has taken legal control of your parents' house because your father was laundering money through your fake consulting firm. Tell him that the dowry he thinks he is getting is actually a mountain of debt and potential indictments. Marissa froze. Her face went pale. She knew the Langfords better than anyone. She knew that Grant loved her, perhaps, but the Langford institution loved respectability. If a scandal of this magnitude touched them, money laundering, fraud, a sister in prison, they would cut the cord before the ink was dry on the prenup. If Grant finds out, I said softly, the wedding is over, the social standing is over. You will be the girl who almost married a Langford, but whose family turned out to be criminals. Marissa sank onto the sofa. She buried her face in her hands. She knew I was right. I held the detonator to her entire life. So here is the deal, I said, addressing the room. You move out in 30 days. You go quietly. You tell the neighbors you are downsizing. You tell the Langfords that you decided to travel. I don't care what lie you tell, as long as you go. And if we don't? Gregory asked. He was trying to summon his old bluster, but he looked small in his big chair. You are one girl, Autumn, you against us. We can change the locks. We can say you tricked us. I am not just one girl. Dad, I said. I am a senior forensic analyst at Kestrel and Brook. I hunt people who hide money for a living. I find things that people bury deep underground. If you try to fight me, if you try to stay one day past the deadline, I will stop being your daughter completely. I will become the auditor. I leaned in close, my voice a whisper that carried across the room. I will release the recording. I will hand over the full dossier of the credit card fraud to the FBI. I will send the bank statements to Grant Langford's campaign manager. I will burn this entire facade to the ground, and I will watch it burn from the safety of my witness testimony. Gregory stared at me. For the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen when he looked at me. It wasn't love. It wasn't pride. It was fear. He was afraid of me. He realized that the tool he had sharpened to be a weapon for his use had turned in his hand, and now the blade was pressed against his throat. You win, he whispered. It was barely audible. You win. Autumn. It isn't about winning, Dad, I said, standing up straight. It is about balancing the books. You took everything from me. My credit, my name, my trust. Now, I am taking the only thing that matters to you." I turned toward the door. The air in the room felt lighter, as if the vacuum had finally broken. "I will send the official notice via email in the morning," I said without looking back. "Do not try to move any funds. I am monitoring the accounts. If a single dollar leaves that operating account for anything other than utilities, I pull the trigger." I walked out of the study. The hallway was long and silent. My heels clicked against the marble floor. Click, click, click. It was a sharp, rhythmic sound. It sounded like a countdown. I reached the front door and opened it. The night air rushed in, cold and clean. It smelled of rain and freedom. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the heavy door shut behind me. Thud. The sound echoed through the massive house. It was the sound of a vault closing. I walked to my car, my legs feeling steady, my breath coming easy. I didn't look back at the window. I didn't need to see them. I knew exactly what they were doing. They were standing in that expensive, beautiful room, looking at each other, realizing that the walls were closing in. For 31 years, I had been the one who was afraid. Afraid of their judgment, afraid of their rejection, afraid of their power. But as I started the engine of my old sedan and pulled out of the driveway, leaving the mansion in the rearview mirror, I realized the dynamic had permanently shifted. They were alone in the dark with the consequences of their own greed, and for the first time, they were listening to the sound of footsteps fading away, terrified of what would happen if those footsteps ever came back. I drove toward the highway, toward my small apartment, toward my life. I had a lot of work to do. I had a house to sell. I had investors to repay. I had a reputation to rebuild. But first, I was going to sleep. For the first time in years, I was going to sleep without the weight of the Mercer name crushing my chest. 2 years in prison wouldn't have killed me. But tonight, I had just started to live. The morning sun did not bring clarity to the Mercer household. It brought a frantic, scrambling desperation that I watched from a distance, like a scientist observing a colony of ants whose hill has been kicked over. I did not stay in the house that night. I had checked into a budget motel 3 towns over, sleeping with my phone under my pillow and the digital copy of the recording backed up on 3 different secure cloud servers. By 9 o'clock in the morning, my alerts were already pinging. Gregory and Elaine had tried to execute a counter-move. It was predictable. They had driven straight to the office of Arthur Penhaligon, their longtime estate lawyer. They likely burst into his office, demanding he file an emergency injunction to overturn the documents they had signed the night before. I could almost hear Gregory's voice, blustering about coercion and trickery, but I knew Arthur. He was a man who valued his license to practice law more than he valued Gregory Mercer's fading retainer fee. I had anticipated this. At 8:30 that morning, I had emailed Arthur a redacted summary of the Sterling Mercer asset structure, along with a polite note highlighting the unclean hands doctrine. I explained that any attempt to reverse the transfer would require his clients to admit in open court that the transfer was originally intended to defraud the IRS and hide assets from a federal investigation. Gregory and Elaine walked into a trap that had already snapped shut. When they demanded he sue me, Arthur would have had to look them in the eye and say the words no narcissist wants to hear. If we file this, you go to prison. They were paralyzed. To fight me was to confess. To stay silent was to lose everything. They left his office empty-handed. 2 ghosts wandering in the daylight. Meanwhile, Marissa was fighting her own war on a different front. She was not worried about the law. She was worried about the wedding. She believed that if she could just keep Grant Langford on the hook, his family's influence could somehow shield her, or at least his money could replace what I had taken. I sat in my car outside a coffee shop, watching the tracking data on the digital packet I had sent earlier that morning. I had not sent the recording to Grant. That would have been too messy, too emotional. Men like Grant Langford, raised in the sterile air of high politics, do not respond well to drama. They respond to data. I had sent an anonymous courier package to Grant's campaign office. Inside was a single, red-flagged credit report. It showed a joint application for a luxury vehicle lease, the one Marissa drove, and a defaulted business loan for M-Squared Concepts, but the key was the co-signer history. I had highlighted the address discrepancies. I had highlighted the fact that the business had no revenue, yet carried massive debt that was being serviced by investor funds from the Langford Trust. It was not an accusation. It was a due diligence report. I watched the status on my laptop. Package delivered, 9:15 a.m. at 9:30. Marissa's phone records, which I could see because the family plan was technically still billed to an account I managed, showed a flurry of outgoing calls to Grant. Call duration, 12 seconds. Call duration, 0 seconds. Call duration, 0 seconds. He was sending her to voicemail. The Langford immune system had detected a virus, and it was isolating the infection. Marissa was screaming into the void, realizing that her charm had a credit limit, and she had just hit it. But I was not done. I needed to finish this legally. I needed to make sure that 5 years from now, Gregory could not come back and claim he was elderly and confused when he signed the house away. I needed one final, undeniable lock on the door. I drove to the office of an independent legal consultant I had hired, a man named David who specialized in corporate dissolution. We sat in his glass-walled conference room, reviewing the Sterling Mercer accounts that I now legally controlled. "You have them," David said. Looking at the ledger, "The transfer is recorded. The title is in the LLC. You are the sole executive officer, but, Autumn, there is something else here." He slid a piece of paper across the table. I was digging through the historical data of the Mercer Family Trust to prepare for the liquidation. David said, "I found this. It was a bridge loan document from 5 years ago. It was for $50,000. Secured against my future earnings. It was signed Autumn Long." "I didn't sign this," I said, picking it up. "Look at the date," David said. I looked. June 12th, 2018. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I was in London that summer. I was doing a study abroad program. I wasn't even on the continent. "Exactly," David said. "Gregory didn't just forge your signature on the lease last month. He forged your signature 5 years ago to cover a margin call on his stock portfolio. This establishes a pattern of identity theft and financial abuse that predates the current crisis." This was the nail in the coffin. Until this moment, Gregory could have argued that the current situation was a one-time desperate act of a father trying to save his daughter. He could have played the sympathy card. But this document proved he had been harvesting me for years. I wasn't a daughter to him. I was a spare battery he plugged in whenever his power ran low. "This means he has zero leverage," I said. "If he tries to claim I tricked him into signing the house over, I produce this. This is 5 years of federal prison. Minimum." "Correct," David said. "You hold all the cards. So, how do you want to end it?" "I want it finished today," I said. "I want them to sign a general release of claims. I want them to legally waive their right to sue, to contest the sale of the house, or to contact me ever again. In exchange, I agree not to press criminal charges for the identity theft." "That is a generous offer," David noted. "I am not doing it for them," I said. "I am doing it so I never have to see their faces again." I picked up my phone. I dialed a number I had saved the night before. "Pruitt Mobile Notary," the crisp voice answered. "Dana, it is Autumn," I said. "I have one final job for you, but not at the house. I need you to meet us at the downtown branch of First National Bank in 2 hours. We are doing a final corporate restructuring." "I have an opening," she said. "I will be there." I sent a group text to my family. It was short. "Meet me at First National Bank. Conference Room B. At noon. Bring your IDs, if you are not there, or if you are late. The recording goes to the FBI, and the 2018 forgery evidence goes to the district attorney. This is the end." I arrived at the bank at 11:45. I sat at the head of the long, polished conference table. Dana Pruitt arrived 5 minutes later. She set up her station, the logbook, the stamp, the seal, with the same terrifying efficiency she had displayed the night before. At 11:58, the door opened. They looked like refugees from a destroyed kingdom. Gregory was wearing a suit, but his tie was crooked and his eyes were bloodshot. Elaine was wearing dark sunglasses indoors, hiding eyes swollen from weeping. Marissa looked shell-shocked, her makeup patchy, clutching her phone as if it were a rosary. They sat down on the opposite side of the table. They didn't speak. The silence was thick with their hatred and their fear. "Let us make this quick," I said. I did not say hello. "David has prepared a general release and settlement agreement. It states that you acknowledge the transfer of the estate to Sterling Mercer Holdings was valid and voluntary. It states that you waive all future claims against the entity or me, and it states that you agree to vacate the property within 30 days. And if we sign?" Gregory rasped. His voice sounded like it had been dragged over gravel. "What do we get?" "You get freedom," I said. "I agree to seal the recording of your confession, and—" I slid the copy of the 2018 forged loan across the table. "I agree not to prosecute you for this." Gregory looked at the document. He recognized it instantly. He paled, his bravado dissolving into dust. He realized that I had seen the depth of his betrayal. He realized there was no bottom to the hole he had dug. "You were in London," he whispered. "Yes," I said. "I was—" "You are a monster," Gregory hissed, trying to summon one last spark of dominance. "You planned this. You trapped your own father. I should have—" "You should have what?" I interrupted, my voice sharp. "You should have loved me? You should have treated me like a human being instead of a line of credit? It is too late for should-haves. Dad—" I pressed the play button on my phone, which was sitting on the table. The audio from the night before filled the room. Gregory's voice, clear and arrogant, admitting to the embezzlement. "We need someone to take the blame. 2 years won't kill you." Gregory flinched. The sound of his own voice was the most damning witness of all. "Turn it off," Elaine begged. "Please, turn it off. Then sign," I said. Gregory looked at the release form. He looked at Dana, who was waiting with her pen poised, her face a mask of indifference. He looked at the 2018 forgery. "If I sign this," Gregory said, his voice trembling with rage, "you are dead to me. Do you hear me? You are no daughter of mine." "Gregory, stop it!" Elaine shrieked. It was the first time in her life she had ever raised her voice at him. She looked at me, her eyes desperate. "He doesn't mean it. We just have no choice." "He means it," I said calmly, "and I accept his terms." Gregory grabbed the pen. He signed the document with a violent, slashing motion. He threw the pen down. Elaine signed next, her hand shaking so badly she could barely form the letters. She was crying silently, mourning the loss of her status, her home, her illusion. Marissa was last. She looked at the paper. "Grant isn't answering my calls," she whispered. She looked up at me. "He sent an email to my dad's office. He canceled the engagement party. He said his family needs to reassess the alignment." She let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Reassess the alignment. That means it is over, doesn't it?" "Yes," I said. "It is over. You ruined my life," she said, staring at me with pure venom. "I saved you from a federal indictment. Marissa," I said. "You are welcome." She signed. Dana Pruitt moved the documents toward her. She checked the IDs again. She checked the signatures. Then, she picked up her stamp. Thud, thud, thud. The sound echoed in the quiet bank vault. It was the sound of shackles breaking. It was the sound of a heavy burden falling off my back and crashing to the floor, never to be picked up again. "It is finished," Dana said. She handed me the notarized originals. I stood up. I put the papers in my briefcase. I looked at the 3 strangers sitting across from me. They looked small. They looked ordinary. Without the house, without the money, without the lie. They were just 3 people who had made bad choices and were finally paying the bill. "You have 30 days, I said. "The realtors will be there on day 31 to list the property. The proceeds will go to pay back the investors you stole from. Whatever is left, if anything is left, I will transfer to an account for you, but I wouldn't count on much." "Where will we go?" Elaine asked, her voice hollow. "I heard minimum security isn't so bad," I said, echoing their words back to them. "But since you are not going to prison, you might try a rental. I hear the apartments on the east side are affordable." I turned and walked out of the conference room. I walked out of the bank and into the bright, blinding sunshine of the afternoon. The city sounded loud and chaotic, but to me, it sounded like a symphony. I walked to my car. I got in and sat there for a moment, my hands on the steering wheel. I thought about the night they called me into the study. I thought about the dossier they slid across the desk. I thought about the casual way they had sentenced me to 2 years of my life to save their vanity. 2 years in prison won't kill you. They were right. It wouldn't have killed me. I would have survived. I would have kept my head down, done my time, and come out the other side. But the truth? The truth is a far more dangerous weapon than a prison sentence. The truth is a demolition ball. I looked at the notarized documents in the seat beside me. It was just paper, just ink and a rubber stamp, but it was enough to bring down a dynasty. "It didn't kill me," I whispered to myself, a small smile touching my lips, "but it certainly killed the facade." I started the engine. I had a house to sell. I had a name to clear. And for the first time in 31 years, the road ahead was completely, beautifully open. I put the car in drive and merged into traffic, leaving the Mercers in my rearview mirror, shrinking smaller and smaller until they were nothing but a speck of dust. And then, finally, gone. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a wild ride, and I hope you enjoyed seeing justice served as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Drop a comment down below and represent your city or country. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this revenge drama, please make sure to subscribe to Leona Revenge Stories so you never miss an episode. Hit that like button if you think Autumn made the right choice. And smash that hype button to help this story get recommended to more people. Your support means the world to us. Stay safe, stay smart. And remember, always read the fine print before you sign.